Hello, my name is Sarah, and I'm 30 years old. I've worn the United States Navy uniform for nearly a decade, survived storms that tore the sea open, and walked through situations most people only hear about in distant news reports. I've been pushed, pulled, broken, and rebuilt more times than I can count. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the kind of pain that came not from war, not from danger, not from enemies, but from the people I called my own family. People think heartbreak comes from losing someone you love, or from betrayal in romance, or from failure in life. But my heartbreak came dressed in suits and fancy dresses, decorated with flowers and music, inside a wedding hall filled with smiles. It came from the very people I grew up with, my own blood, and on a day that was supposed to be filled with celebration. I never imagined that the worst wound of my life wouldn't come from a battlefield, but from a room full of people who claimed to care about me. The moment I arrived at my brother Kevin's wedding, I knew something felt off. Maybe it was the way my mother, Karen, barely looked at me. Maybe it was the way my father, Henry, quickly glanced away, pretending he didn't see the cane in my hand, the cane that had become a part of me ever since I was injured during a rescue mission months ago. I was used to people staring at me, whispering behind my back, since the injury. But what hurt more was the silence from those who should have been the first to hug me, welcome me, and tell me they were proud. I even managed to walk into the hall after everything I had been through. When I stepped inside the decorated ballroom, the music softened for a second. People turned and looked at me, not in admiration, not with warmth, but with that subtle, sharp curiosity people have when they see a wounded soldier. I took a slow breath and smiled, trying to push away the sting in my chest. I had come here because it was Kevin's wedding, and despite everything, I wanted to believe that family meant something. I wanted to believe that today could be different. But Kevin didn't wait long before proving me wrong. He was standing near the stage with his bride, Olivia. She looked beautiful, nervous but glowing, completely unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. As soon as Kevin saw me, he didn't smile, he didn't open his arms, he didn't say he was glad I made it. Instead, he laughed, loudly. The kind of laugh that slices through a room and makes people turn to see what's so funny. Then he said it. "Look, everyone, my disabled sailor sister finally made it." His voice echoed, cutting deeper than any injury I'd ever sustained. "You're still limping? God, Sarah, how are you even going to sit through the ceremony? Maybe we should get you a wheelchair to match the theme." A few guests laughed. Some smiled awkwardly. Others just looked away, uncomfortable but not brave enough to speak. I stood there frozen for a moment, gripping my cane so tightly my knuckles turned white. My throat tightened, but I refused to let tears fall. Not here, not in front of people who wanted to see me break. I'd been trained to stay calm in pressure, to keep my emotions in check during dangerous missions. But nothing in Navy training prepares you for the moment your own brother humiliates you in front of an entire wedding hall. I tried to stay composed as I walked forward, step by careful step. Every movement sent a sting through my injured leg, but the emotional pain burned far worse. I forced a smile and congratulated Kevin and Olivia, but Kevin's words kept echoing in my head. Disabled sailor. Limping embarrassment. Needing a wheelchair. My mother walked up and whispered, "Sarah, you could have at least tried to hide the limp. This is a special day. Don't make it about you." I stared at her, stunned. About me? I had come quietly, humbly alone, hoping just to blend into the background. But to her, even my presence was a problem. My father simply nodded at me with a cold, short smile. No warmth. No, how are you? No, glad you made it. Just an empty acknowledgement, as if greeting a stranger. I tried to find a place to sit where no one would stare. But even then, I could hear whispers. "She's the injured one, right? What happened to her? She used to be so strong, what a shame." My chest tightened again. I had faced enemies at sea, jumped from helicopters into crashing waves, carried injured sailors on my back. But this quiet, polite cruelty felt heavier than anything the Navy ever demanded of me. I told myself, just get through the wedding. Smile. Leave quietly. But deep down, I knew something inside me had started to crack. And I had no idea that this humiliation was about to collide with something much bigger. Something that would expose the truth, shake the entire wedding, and change my life forever. Growing up, I always felt like I was standing in a shadow, one that belonged to my younger brother Kevin. Even as a child, I noticed how differently he and I were treated, though back then I didn't have the words to understand it. I just knew that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much effort I put into school, sports, or chores, Kevin somehow always came out as the star of the family. My mother, Karen, used to call him my perfect boy, even when he did nothing more than wake up in the morning. If he got a B in school, it was a celebration. If I brought home an A, her response was always the same. "That's good, Sarah, but you should have tried a little harder." My father, Henry, wasn't any different. He always believed boys needed to be uplifted, supported, and encouraged, while girls simply needed to be responsible and stay out of trouble. He used to drag me into the kitchen and say, "Help your mother," while Kevin sat on the couch playing video games for hours. Whenever I asked why Kevin didn't have to help, the answer was always, "He's a boy. You should know better." I learned early that in our home, effort didn't matter, gender did. There were days when I tried everything just to make them proud. I joined school clubs, participated in events, even won a science fair competition once. I remember rushing home, trophy in hand, heart full of excitement. But before I could even speak, my mother looked at Kevin and said, "Sweetheart, did you finish your homework?" Her tone was soft, warm, full of love. When she finally turned to me, all she said was, "Oh, that's nice. Put it on the shelf." The shelf. That was my entire childhood. Accomplishments placed on shelves, collecting dust, forgotten. Kevin's birthday parties were grand affairs. Mine were quiet dinners at home. When Kevin got into trouble at school for fighting, my parents defended him fiercely, saying the other kid must have started it. When I got in trouble once for standing up to a bully, they lectured me for an hour about how girls must behave. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a pattern, a system, a way of living where Kevin always came first. As we grew older, the differences sharpened. Kevin became more confident, sometimes arrogant, because he grew up believing nothing was ever his fault. Meanwhile, I became quieter, always trying to prove my worth, but never truly succeeding in my parents' eyes. When I told them I wanted to join the Navy, they didn't try to support me. They didn't even ask why. My father simply said, "Sarah, this is a phase. You're not built for something like that." Kevin laughed when he heard the news. "Sarah in the Navy? She'll come running back in a week." Their doubts didn't stop me. They fueled me. Joining the Navy was the first decision I made entirely for myself. For the first time, I walked away from home feeling like I had a purpose. Training was hard, brutal even, but every push-up, every sleepless night, every challenge made me feel like I was becoming someone I could be proud of. I still remember the day I graduated from basic training. I was exhausted, but I had my uniform on, my head held high, and a smile I couldn't hide. When the ceremony ended, I looked for my family, but no one was there. They didn't attend. Not because something urgent happened, not because they couldn't make it. They simply didn't think it was important enough. Kevin had a basketball game that morning. They chose his game over the biggest day of my life. Standing there alone among families cheering for their loved ones, I felt a familiar ache, the same ache I felt as a child when my achievements were dismissed like background noise. But I learned something that day. If I wanted recognition, strength, confidence, I would have to build it myself. And I did. I climbed the ranks. I survived missions most people can't imagine. I proved myself again and again. But no matter how far I went, no matter how many honors I earned, my family, especially Kevin, never stopped seeing me as the girl who lived in his shadow. And that shadow followed me all the way to his wedding day, where the final crack in my heart was waiting. When I left home for the Navy, I carried only two things with me: a small duffel bag and a quiet promise to myself that I would become someone my family could no longer overlook. I remember that first morning of training, the cold air burning in my lungs, the weight of the gear on my back, and the drill instructor's voice cutting through the silence, like thunder. Most recruits were intimidated. I wasn't. I had already spent years fighting to be seen, fighting to be heard. Compared to that, the shouting didn't scare me. It felt familiar. Training pushed me harder than anything before. Long runs at dawn, simulations that tested every muscle and every instinct, nights spent studying navigation and emergency response. I watched recruits give up, fall behind, or lose the will to continue. But every time I felt myself reaching my limit, I reminded myself of Kevin's laughter, my mother's dismissive looks, my father's quiet doubt. I reminded myself that no one expected me to succeed, and that was exactly why I had to. Months later, when I earned my uniform and stood tall among my graduating class, I felt something I had never felt at home: belonging. Here, I wasn't the girl who should have stayed quiet. I wasn't the daughter who should have been more responsible. I was Petty Officer Sarah, a sailor who had earned her place through sweat, grit, and sheer determination. Years passed. I climbed the ranks, volunteered for missions others avoided, and built a reputation for staying calm when everything was falling apart. My officers trusted me. My team respected me. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Then came the mission that changed everything. We were deployed off the coast during a high-risk rescue operation. A small vessel had sent a distress signal. Engine failure, heavy flooding, and civilians trapped inside. The weather was brutal. Waves crashed against our ship with the force of steel. The wind howled like a warning. But hesitation meant lives lost, and that was something none of us could accept. I was part of the rescue team lowered into the raging water. The moment we hit the ocean, the cold punched through my gear like a blade. Visibility was almost zero, rain cutting horizontally across my face. Through the chaos, we spotted the sinking vessel. I could hear screams over the storm, raw, terrified screams. "Move!" I shouted to my team as we swam toward it. When we reached the vessel, part of the structure gave way and crashed into the water. I didn't think. I just reacted. I pushed one of the civilians out of the way and felt the impact slam into my leg. The pain was instant, sharp, electric. But there was no time to stop. I kept moving, dragging two people toward the rescue basket, ignoring the weight pulling at my injured limb. By the time the last civilian was lifted to safety, my vision had blurred. My body felt heavy, my breath uneven, but I forced myself up the rescue line. The moment my boots hit the deck, I collapsed. I woke up hours later in the ship's medical bay, bright lights stinging my eyes and a faint beeping echoing in the room. Dr. Wilson stood beside me, a calm presence with kind eyes and a voice that somehow cut through pain like balm. "You're lucky, Sarah," he said, checking the monitor. "Another inch, and the bone would have shattered. You pushed yourself far beyond what your body could handle." I tried to sit up, wincing at the fire in my leg. "Was everyone rescued?" I whispered. He paused, then smiled. "Because of you, yes. Every single one." Those words meant more to me than any praise I'd received at home. But the reality slowly settled in. My injury wasn't temporary. It was serious. It meant limited mobility, a cane for assistance, and months of rehabilitation. My Navy career wasn't over, but it had changed. I had changed. Dr. Wilson spent weeks monitoring my recovery, encouraging me, reminding me that healing is not weakness. But returning home after that deployment, that was the part no one prepared me for. I thought my family would finally understand, finally appreciate me. Instead, they barely acknowledged the injury. Kevin even joked, "So you finally broke something other than rules." I shrugged it off like I always did. But somewhere deep inside, I hoped that one day they would see me for who I really was. I didn't know that day would come, just not in the way anyone expected. Not gently, not quietly, and not privately. It would come publicly, in a room full of people, on Kevin's wedding day. When I returned to the wedding hall after freshening up, the noise had grown louder, the music brighter, the laughter sharper. People were dancing, clinking glasses, taking pictures, celebrating a day that, for me, was already slipping into something painful. I tried to steady myself, reminding my heart to stay strong. It's just one day, I told myself. Smile, congratulate your brother, leave early. But deep down, I knew the thin thread holding me together was already fraying. I walked toward the main area, cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Every step reminded me of a storm I had survived months ago. Every step reminded me of the mission that nearly took my leg. And every step reminded me that instead of respect, all I had received from my own family was discomfort, avoidance, and silence. Kevin saw me approaching. For a moment, I thought he might soften, just enough to let the day pass without cruelty. But Kevin had a way of choosing the exact moment when a person was most vulnerable before striking. He smirked, raised his glass, and said loudly enough for half the hall to hear, "Look at you, Sarah." A disabled sailor pretending she still belongs in the world of normal people. A few heads turned toward me. Conversations paused. The music suddenly felt too quiet. Kevin wasn't finished. "You should have stayed home. I mean, what were you thinking? Limping into my wedding like this? You're embarrassing yourself, and honestly, you're embarrassing us." The words hit me harder than the wave that crushed my leg during the rescue mission. I stood there frozen, the room spinning in slow motion around me. The shame crawled at my throat like fire. My fingers tightened around the cane until they ached. My mother turned to Kevin, not to scold him, but to gently tap his arm and say, "Lower your voice, sweetheart. This is your big day." Not one word defending me. Not one word asking him to stop. Not one word acknowledging the pain in my eyes. My father avoided looking at me completely, as if acknowledging me might ruin the celebration. Olivia, Kevin's new bride, looked horrified for a moment, but she didn't speak. Maybe she felt powerless. Maybe she was afraid of causing a scene. Maybe she didn't know what kind of family she had just married into. All I knew was that I had never felt so small. The whispers started again. "She's the injured one. Is she okay? Why is she even here if she can't walk properly? Poor thing." I hated that. I didn't want pity, and I didn't deserve humiliation. My breath caught in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. My leg throbbed with a familiar ache, but this time the pain wasn't physical. It was deeper, raw, carved straight into my dignity. I turned away, swallowing hard, blinking fast to keep the tears from falling. Navy training teaches you to stay calm under pressure, but it never teaches you how to survive your own family's cruelty. I found a quiet corner near the exit and sat down, my body trembling from the effort of holding myself together. I took slow, shaky breaths. Why did I come? Why did I believe today might be different? Why did I think, even for a second, that Kevin would be proud of me? I stared at the floor, feeling the weight of every insult Kevin had thrown at me since childhood. But this was the worst. This was the moment something inside me finally cracked. For a second, I felt utterly alone. Then suddenly, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name that instantly shifted the air around me. Captain Reynolds. He never called unless it was important. I wiped my face quickly and answered. "Captain? Is everything okay?" His voice was firm but warm. "Sarah, you need to be ready. I'm on my way to pick you up. You're being honored tonight for the bravery you showed during the rescue mission. The ceremony won't start without you." My breath caught. My heart steadied. After hours of humiliation, someone finally spoke to me with respect. I whispered, "Sir, are you serious?" "Absolutely. And Sarah, I'm proud of you. We all are." I closed my eyes. In one moment, everything changed. I didn't know what was about to happen at the wedding, but I knew one thing clearly. The girl they tried to break was about to stand taller than she ever had before. When I ended the call with Captain Reynolds, I just sat there for a moment, staring at my shaking hands. His words repeated in my mind like a steady heartbeat. "You're being honored tonight. We're proud of you." After everything I had just endured, those words didn't feel real. I had walked into this wedding expecting nothing, certainly not respect. And yet, here I was, with a senior Navy officer telling me that the same mission that nearly took my leg had earned me one of the highest recognitions in my career. I inhaled slowly, letting the warmth of that acknowledgement push out the cold sting of Kevin's cruelty. My heart steadied. My breathing evened. For the first time that entire day, I felt like I wasn't alone. But the moment of quiet didn't last long. The wedding hall's doors suddenly opened, and a rush of guests hurried inside, whispering loudly. A strange excitement buzzed through the room. People were pulling out their phones, running toward the windows, craning their necks to see something outside. At first, I didn't move. I thought it was just another grand entrance, by some late-arriving relatives. But the whispers grew louder, more focused. Who are all those cars? Oh my God, those are military vehicles. Is there some kind of emergency? My pulse jumped. I stood up slowly and walked toward the edge of the hall, my cane tapping softly against the floor. As I approached the window, the world outside came into sharp focus, 5 black Navy SUVs pulling up in a perfect formation. Their engines hummed with a deep authority that cut through the chaos of the wedding music. Uniformed Navy personnel stepped out of each vehicle. Their presence alone commanded attention, calm, professional, unmistakably official. And then the last SUV door opened. Captain Reynolds himself stepped out, his posture sharp, his uniform immaculate. The gold on his shoulders gleamed even from where I stood. For a moment, the entire wedding froze, stunned into silence. People whispered nervously, "Is someone important here? Why would a Navy captain come to a wedding?" "Something big is happening." Kevin looked confused, his face tightening with irritation. Olivia clutched his arm, unsure. My parents stared with wide eyes, their expressions flickering between confusion and disbelief. I didn't move. Part of me couldn't. Part of me was afraid this wasn't real. Captain Reynolds entered the hall with 2 officers beside him. The room instinctively parted, giving him a path straight inside. Every step he took brought a heavy, quiet tension, an authority that filled the space far more than the wedding decorations or music ever could. He scanned the crowd once, and then his gaze landed directly on me. "Sarah," he said firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. My heart jumped. People turned toward me instantly, some in shock, others in confusion, many in disbelief. Kevin frowned. "Wait, what is this? Why is the Navy here?" Captain Reynolds didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on me as he spoke. "I'm here to escort you to your award ceremony. Your bravery during the rescue mission saved multiple lives. Tonight, the Navy is recognizing you for extraordinary courage under extreme danger." Gasps rippled through the hall. Someone dropped a fork. Someone whispered, "She's a hero?" Others just stared at me, as if they were seeing me for the first time. Kevin's face lost all color. My mother slowly covered her mouth with her hand. My father shifted uncomfortably, eyes widening. But Captain Reynolds wasn't finished. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly in respect, but keeping it loud enough for those nearby. "Sarah, you earned this. The Navy doesn't forget its heroes." Something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from relief, from validation, from a truth I had been carrying alone for far too long. I swallowed hard, trying not to let emotion choke me. Captain Reynolds extended his hand. "Shall we?" For the first time that day, I straightened my back without thinking about the pain. The humiliation Kevin had thrown at me only minutes earlier suddenly felt small, weak, meaningless. As I placed my hand in Captain Reynolds and took my step forward, the entire room watched in stunned silence. And I realized they were no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at me with respect. A respect my own family had never given me. When Captain Reynolds walked deeper into the hall with me beside him, the entire atmosphere shifted. The buzzing wedding chatter evaporated. The laughter died down. Even the music felt like it didn't belong anymore. It was as if someone had paused the world and left only the sound of our footsteps moving across the glossy floor. But Kevin stepped forward with the swagger of a man who still believed he was in control of the room. He raised his voice, loud, irritated, and full of the same arrogance I had grown up hearing. "Seriously, Sarah? You brought Navy officers to my wedding? What are you trying to prove? You're already a disabled sailor. Now you want attention too." A wave of shock went across the hall. Captain Reynolds stopped walking. He didn't turn slowly. He didn't hesitate. He pivoted sharply, like a man trained to react instantly. His eyes locked onto Kevin with a cold, commanding intensity that made several guests step back. "Repeat what you just said," Captain Reynolds demanded. Kevin blinked, surprised. I was just saying she shouldn't be here limping around. That's enough." Captain Reynolds cut him off, his voice slicing through the tension like steel. "You insulted a wounded service member who risked her life saving civilians. And you did it with pride." Kevin tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin and nervous. "I mean, come on, Captain. She's my sister. This is just family humor." Captain Reynolds stepped closer until he was only a few feet from Kevin. His jaw tightened. "There is nothing humorous about belittling the sacrifice of a United States Navy sailor," he said, "especially one who nearly lost her leg saving lives." Gasps echoed through the hall. Olivia covered her mouth. My mother's face strained of color. My father stiffened like someone had slapped him. Kevin swallowed hard. "Saving lives?" Captain Reynolds nodded. Then, turning to the entire room, he raised his voice so every guest could hear. "Since many of you seem unaware, let me tell you who Sarah really is." He motioned toward me gently, respectfully. "She is the sailor who swam through a violent storm to reach a sinking civilian vessel. She shielded a stranger with her own body when debris collapsed. She dragged injured passengers through freezing water despite a shattered leg. And she refused to be evacuated until every single civilian was safe." The hall went silent. Utterly silent. People stared at me like I was someone they didn't recognize. Someone they had overlooked just like my family always had. Kevin shook his head, disbelief clouding his face. "That can't be true. Sarah? She wouldn't do all that." Captain Reynolds turned toward him again. "She did," he said firmly. "And, because of her courage, not one life was lost that night. Your sister is the reason several families didn't have to mourn their loved ones." I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from emotion. Hearing someone defend me, hearing someone speak proudly about me, it felt like a weight I had been carrying for years suddenly lifted. But Captain Reynolds wasn't finished. He faced the crowd again. "The Navy doesn't forget heroism. Tonight, Sarah will be honored at a special ceremony. The vehicles outside are here to escort her with full respect." Whispers shot through the room like sparks. "I had no idea. She did all that. She saved people? Oh my God, she's a hero." My parents stood frozen. My mother's eyes filled with tears, not pride, but shock. My father's jaw clenched, but his gaze wouldn't meet mine. For the first time in my life, they were forced to see me, not as the daughter they dismissed, but as the woman I had fought to become. Kevin, however, wasn't done humiliating himself. He scoffed loudly. "So what? She still limps. She's still." Captain Reynolds raised a hand. "Stop talking." Kevin froze. Then Captain Reynolds took a deep breath and spoke with a calm authority that silenced whatever courage Kevin thought he had left. "If you had even a fraction of your sister's strength, sacrifice, or integrity, you'd be a better man today." A quiet sting swept across the hall. People looked at Kevin, not with sympathy but disappointment. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the center of admiration. He was the center of shame. And I, the sister he spent years belittling, finally stood in a light he could never dim. The hall was already drowning in tension, but Captain Reynolds wasn't finished. His expression shifted from anger to something colder, controlled, official, the kind of expression military officers wear when they are about to deliver news that changes everything. He turned slightly toward me, then back to the crowd. "There is one more matter," he said, his tone heavy. "Something that needs to be addressed publicly. Not for drama, but for justice." A ripple of nervous whispers swept across the room. Guests exchanged glances, uncertain whether to stay silent or lean in. Kevin frowned, crossing his arms with forced bravado. "Oh, please," he scoffed. "What now?" Captain Reynolds didn't even blink. He signaled to one of the officers who stepped forward, holding a tablet. The officer tapped the screen, and Captain Reynolds continued. During the review of Sarah's injury report and her medical paperwork for tonight's award ceremony, we discovered multiple financial claims filed under her name. My heart stopped. Claims? Under my name? Captain Reynolds' voice deepened. These claims included disability compensation forms, housing allowance requests, and medical reimbursements, all submitted fraudulently. Whispers exploded across the hall.
What?
Fraud? Under her name? Who would do that? My breath grew shallow. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. I had never filed those claims. I never asked for compensation. I never even considered taking money for my injury. Kevin stood frozen, his smirk fading by the second.
I
don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, his voice suddenly thin. Captain Reynolds took a step closer to him. Oh, you will. He nodded to the officer again, who displayed the digital documents on the tablet. Captain Reynolds lifted it slightly so nearby guests could see. These forms were filled out using Sarah's name, but with your email address, Kevin. Your handwriting. Your bank account. A collective gasp broke through the hall. My mother whispered, Kevin? My father muttered something under his breath, unable to look up. Kevin's face drained of all color. That's a mistake, he stammered. Someone set me up. This can't. Captain Reynolds cut him off. There is no mistake. Every claim traces back to you. You used your sister's service-related injury to apply for thousands of dollars in benefits she never asked for. The room felt like it tilted. I stared at Kevin, my voice barely leaving my throat. Why would you do that to me? For once in his life, Kevin couldn't come up with a slick answer. He sputtered, I needed money. You were in the Navy. You wouldn't even notice. And you owed me for... Owed you? I whispered, stunned. For what? Kevin's anger snapped back as he tried to defend the indefensible. For everything. You always got attention for being strong and brave. I just took a little advantage of your situation, okay? Guests gasped. Olivia stepped back from him, shock settling into her features. Kevin, how could you? But Captain Reynolds wasn't done. He raised his voice so the entire hall could hear. Fraud against the U.S. military is a federal offense. But stealing from your own sister, using her wound, her sacrifice, her pain, is beyond disgraceful. The words reverberated like thunder. People stared at Kevin differently now, not with confusion, but with disgust. My father looked sick. My mother covered her face with trembling hands. Olivia looked like she might faint. I felt the weight of betrayal drop into my chest, heavy, suffocating. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just paperwork. It was proof. Proof that for years I had been right. Kevin never saw me as a sister. He saw me as an opportunity. Captain Reynolds' voice softened only for me. Sarah, we discovered this while preparing your ceremony paperwork. We couldn't ignore it, and you deserve to know the truth. I nodded slowly, tears stinging at the back of my eyes, but not from weakness. From clarity. From finally seeing the truth laid bare in front of everyone who once doubted me. Kevin tried one last desperate attempt. Come on, Sarah, you won't let them arrest your own brother, right? That was the breaking point. The entire room waited for my answer. For the first time in my life, I didn't stay silent. I didn't do this to you, Kevin. I said quietly. You did this to yourself. And just then, the sound of police sirens approached the hall. Justice was on its way. The moment the sirens echoed outside the wedding hall, the entire atmosphere shifted from tense to terrifyingly real. Every guest turned toward the entrance, their murmurs rising like a wave of disbelief. Kevin stood frozen, stiff as stone, his eyes darting wildly around the room as if searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. Then the doors opened. Officer Davis walked in with 2 uniformed officers behind him. His presence alone commanded silence. He scanned the hall calmly, professionally, until his eyes landed on Captain Reynolds, who gave him a single, firm nod. That was all Officer Davis needed. He stepped toward Kevin with purpose. Kevin, he called out, voice loud and clear. "We need to speak with you." Kevin tried to laugh, but it cracked awkwardly. This is ridiculous. This is all a misunderstanding. It's my wedding day, for God's sake." Officer Davis didn't flinch. "Wedding or not, you're under investigation for multiple counts of financial fraud involving federal military benefits." The guests gasped again. A woman near the front actually dropped her purse. Kevin raised his hands defensively.
"No."
"They're lying. Sarah is lying. This is all her revenge because I insulted her or whatever." Officer Davis shook his head. "The documents, accounts, and digital signatures all link back to you. We verified everything." Kevin's voice cracked into desperation. "You can't arrest me in front of everyone. You can't ruin my life like this." Officer Davis glanced around the hall. "You did that yourself." Then he reached for Kevin's wrist. Kevin jerked back violently.
"No."
"Get away from me." "I'm not going anywhere." A few guests flinched. Olivia covered her mouth, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Kevin, please stop," she begged, voice trembling. "You're making it worse." He ignored her, eyes locked on Officer Davis with rising panic. But Officer Davis remained calm, almost heartbreakingly calm. He stepped closer and said firmly, "Kevin Carter, you are under arrest for fraud, identity misuse, and falsifying federal documents." And right there, in the center of his own wedding hall, in front of friends, family, co-workers, and the woman he had just married, Officer Davis handcuffed him. Kevin erupted. "This is your fault, Sarah," he shouted, spittle flying. "You ruined everything. Why couldn't you just let me handle things? Why did you have to show up?" I stared at him, stunned, not by his anger, but by how small he suddenly looked. Not a brother, not a man, just someone who had built his entire life on entitlement. Olivia stepped forward, her face pale and devastated. "Kevin, is it true? Did you really use your sister's injury to steal money?" Kevin couldn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. Olivia crumpled into tears, whispering, "I married a man I don't even know." My mother collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. "How could you do this?" she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Kevin or to herself. My father stood rigid, jaw clenched, staring at the ground with the look of a man whose entire illusion of family had just shattered. As Kevin was escorted through the hall, guests parted away from him, not out of respect, but disgust. Their earlier admiration had dissolved into whispers of shame. Officer Davis paused before exiting and turned to me with a respectful nod. "Ma'am, justice will take its course. You did nothing wrong." For the first time since I set foot in that hall, I felt something inside me settle. Not triumph, not revenge, but release. Kevin's shouts faded as he was taken outside, swallowed by the flashing red and blue lights. The wedding was over. The illusion of family was over. And in the middle of that collapsing world, I finally stood steady. As the doors closed behind Officer Davis and the fading echo of Kevin's protests dropped into silence, the wedding hall felt hollow, like the aftermath of a storm. The music had stopped. The lights seemed dimmer. Guests stood clustered in whispering groups, avoiding eye contact with my parents, pretending not to stare at me. For the first time in my life, their silence didn't hurt. It felt freeing. Captain Reynolds stepped closer, his tone gentle now that the chaos had passed. "Sarah," he said, "it's time."
Time.
A word that suddenly felt heavier than everything that had happened tonight. I took one last look around the hall. The broken decorations on the floor. The wilted flowers. The guests who had once looked at me with pity, now watching with something closer to awe. My mother sitting with her head buried in her hands, trembling. My father stiff and unmoving, unable to face me. And Olivia, standing alone, her wedding dress glittering under the lights, her life changed in one evening. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sadness. Not for Kevin, but for what could have been. For a family that never learned how to value me. For a childhood where being strong was never enough. For the years I spent trying to earn love that simply wasn't there to give. But then I remembered the stormy sea. The drowning civilians. The moment my leg shattered under impact.
The pain.
The fight. The survival. And I realized something. I had faced far worse than this. And I had survived every single time. Captain Reynolds extended his arm toward the exit, and I nodded. As we walked out together, the hall parted before us, not with cold avoidance, but with genuine respect. People moved aside quietly, creating a clear path. Some even straightened their posture, instinctively standing as if honoring a uniform I wasn't even wearing tonight. When the doors opened, the night air rushed in, cool, crisp, liberating. The Navy SUVs were still lined up outside in perfect formation, headlights glowing, engines humming steadily, like a heartbeat waiting for me. Uniformed officers stood at attention near the vehicles, their silhouettes sharp against the evening sky. I stepped forward slowly, my cane tapping softly on the pavement. But this time, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt powerful. Captain Reynolds opened the door for me himself. "After everything you've been through," he said quietly, "you deserve to be honored properly." My throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure if my voice would hold. As I settled into the seat, I watched the other officers climb into their vehicles. The moment Captain Reynolds closed my door, all 5 SUVs adjusted into escort formation. Then, in perfect synchronization, they began to move. The wedding hall grew smaller behind me, disappearing into the distance. The humiliation of earlier drifted away with it, fading like a shadow I had finally outrun. And for the first time in years, I let myself breathe fully. I wasn't leaving the wedding in shame. I wasn't running away. I wasn't broken. I was being escorted with honor. As a woman who had served her country, saved lives, and refused to let cruelty define her. As the convoy carried me toward the ceremony, I looked out the window at the blur of lights and thought, this is who I am. Not what my family allowed me to be. Not what Kevin tried to make me feel. This is me. And for the first time, ever, that was enough. The convoy moved through the city streets with a quiet authority, each SUV gliding in perfect formation. Streetlights stretched across the windows like soft golden ribbons. As we approached the Navy headquarters building, my heart beat steadily. Not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a very long time. The entrance was lined with uniformed officers, standing tall in crisp dress blues. Their posture straightened even further when the vehicles rolled to a stop. When my door opened and I stepped out, cane in hand, every officer saluted in unison. The sound, sharp, synchronized, sent a shiver up my spine. I wasn't Sarah, the unwanted daughter. I wasn't Sarah, the overlooked sister. I wasn't Sarah, the disabled sailor Kevin tried to mock. I was Lieutenant Sarah Carter of the United States Navy. And for the first time ever, the world was seeing me clearly. Captain Reynolds walked beside me as we headed toward the main hall. The ceremony room glowed with warm light. Quiet music played, and rows of Navy personnel filled the seats. Families of service members sat proudly in the audience. Photos of the rescue mission were projected on the screen, waves crashing, helicopters circling, the chaos of the operation. And then I saw him, General Lawson. He stood at the center of the stage, tall, composed, a man whose presence commanded a room without saying a word. When he saw me, his expression softened into a small, genuine smile. "Lieutenant Carter," he said as I stepped forward, "tonight we honor not just your bravery but your heart." My throat tightened. No one had ever spoken about my heart before. I took my place beside him as he addressed the entire room. During a violent storm off the eastern coast, Lieutenant Sarah Carter risked her life to rescue civilians trapped in a sinking vessel. Despite sustaining a severe injury, she refused evacuation until every person was safe. Her actions embody the highest values of this uniform: courage, sacrifice, and unwavering duty. The room erupted into applause, loud, proud, and pure. I blinked hard, fighting the emotion rising in my chest. General Lawson gestured toward a decorated officer standing nearby. The officer stepped forward carrying a velvet box. Inside was a medal, one I had dreamed of once, but never expected to receive. General Lawson pinned it on my uniform gently, respectfully. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, meeting my eyes, "we honor you for extraordinary heroism under life-threatening conditions." The applause returned, stronger this time. It washed over me like a wave of validation I'd waited my entire life to feel. I felt my breathing grow shakier. But this time, it wasn't from pain. It was relief. It was pride. It was the feeling of finally being seen, not as a burden, not as a disappointment, not as a girl living in someone else's shadow, but as a hero in my own right. After the ceremony, officers lined up to shake my hand.
Some thanked me.
Some congratulated me. Some simply smiled with admiration. But the moment that anchored itself in my memory was when Captain Reynolds placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You didn't just survive that storm, Sarah. You rose above it." I swallowed hard. "Sir, thank you. For everything." He nodded. "Just promise me one thing. Never forget who you are." As the night quieted and the guests dispersing, I stepped outside into the cool air. The city lights glowed softly around the headquarters building. I stood there, metal warm against my uniform, feeling a peace I had never known before. Kevin's arrest. My family's collapse under their own choices. The humiliation that nearly broke me. All of it had led to this moment. Not revenge, not triumph over others, but victory over the pain I carried for years. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove myself. I wasn't seeking approval. I wasn't chasing love that never came. I finally understood. My worth never depended on who failed to see it. It depended on who I chose to become. And I had become stronger than every storm I survived. As the wind brushed gently across my face, I whispered to myself, "I'm Sarah. I'm 30 years old. And I'm finally free." Thank you for watching this story to the end. If Sarah's journey moved you, or made you think, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know which part of her story touched you the most. Your support helps this channel grow and brings more powerful stories your way. So make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next upload. See you in the next story.